20 plus years ago, women were scared away from hormones, and we've got recent evidence on meta-analysis, retrospective analyses, to show that going on to hormone replacement therapy at the time of perimenopause decreases a woman's risk of dementia by 30 to 50%. So now we've got a bunch of women who 20 years ago were scared away from hormones.
Yeah.
Our diet has deteriorated rapidly, and our processed food consumption is just heartbreaking. So when you put all the risk factors together, because that's going to be a risk factor for type 2 diabetes, which I've said is a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease, and then that we've gotten really good at detecting cancers early and managing heart disease. These are all big wins for the population, but really I think now it's time for the brain to take the top priority.
Welcome back to the Holistic Health and Hormones podcast. Today, we're exploring a topic that touches so many families, yet is often surrounded by fear and uncertainty: Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline. Is memory loss an inevitable part of aging, or are there steps that we can take to protect and even improve our brain health? In this episode, we'll discuss the emerging science behind Alzheimer's disease, the role of inflammation, insulin resistance, hormones, mitochondrial health, and the lifestyle factors that influence our cognitive future. We'll also explore the fascinating connection between brain health, metabolic health, and longevity, and what practical steps you can start taking to support a healthier brain for years to come. So let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the Holistic Health and Hormones podcast. I'm super excited to have Dr. Sarah Stevens with us today. She helps people protect their brain health and reverse early Alzheimer's disease using precision medicine. She identifies and addresses the root causes of cognitive decline while optimizing whole body health. Dr. Sarah is an Australian medical doctor with a PhD in mitochondrial disease, offering personalised, doctor-led programs using the Bredesen Protocol. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, Ellie. Thanks for having me.
That's all right. So tell me about a background about what led you specifically into sort of being a specialist in brain health and Alzheimer's. Like, why go down that path?
I've been a doctor for 16 years and I've been a very general doctor. But when the father of one of my best friends was diagnosed with and then died of Alzheimer's disease, it really made me take stock of my own health, because he had been, up until that point, extremely healthy. And he'd been like a role model for me. So when I saw him go down that path, despite what I saw him do everything right, it made me wonder about my own risk for Alzheimer's disease. So I went looking for what is cutting edge, because I knew there was no standard care that was reversing or preventing Alzheimer's disease. So I looked just outside conventional medicine. I found Dr. Bredesen's book called The End of Alzheimer's Disease, which I read with myself in mind, like how to prevent Alzheimer's disease for myself, and soon realised that this needs to be disseminated to everyone in Australia. And I realised that I had the access to the testing and all the guidance, so I did his training.
And is it really common? Like, what is the percentage of people, like I know we're talking, are you looking Australia-wide or world? Like, what are the statistics of sort of Alzheimer's currently?
They're horrifying. Dementia, which is the umbrella term, but most cases of dementia are Alzheimer's disease, but dementia is the number one cause of death in Australia. It's been the leading cause of death for women for a number of years. At the moment, 400,000 people in Australia are suffering with dementia, and shockingly, that number is set to double by 2050. So this is an accelerating diagnosis.
And I hear like there's so many of my own clients, and they're like, oh, you know, I've just found out like our father-in-law or our father has been diagnosed, and it is like it can be a really, really rapid decline. Like once you're diagnosed, right, it is huge. And prevention is everything. Obviously, you're saying there's not much. I mean, what does conventional medicine offer in terms of this sort of work? And then, so why are we looking at now more natural and obviously preventative work? But what is someone comes into your clinic with Alzheimer's dementia? What is a conventional general practice currently?
The general course would be that people might come in and say that they know something's up, that they're not quite right. Some people come in at that stage. Some people try and push through and cover it up, honestly, but others don't. Often the response from a doctor is to do a 30-point test, a MOCA test, to see if there's any detectable cognitive impairment. But that test is not particularly sensitive. Like if deficits are picked up on that test, then we're already talking about MCI, mild cognitive impairment. But
Mhm.
there are more sensitive tests that could be done. And also, if the person knows something's up, then something probably is up. And so, but as people progress, if they get a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment, they might be offered a medication that makes the neurotransmitters in their brain hang around for longer. That can offer people a little blip in cognition, a blip up in improvement in cognition, but overall, it does not change the course of the disease or life expectancy. It
Yeah.
doesn't change the disease in any meaningful way. And I think that people are getting general health advice around those stages as well, but I think it's quite it's general. It's things like eat healthy, exercise, and I don't think that that's specific enough, honestly.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, look, and even with that, does it differ from like when someone's coming in with just a bit of cognitive decline and now it's actually early onset of Alzheimer's dementia? So is there a way that they can slow down that cognitive decline if it's caught early enough without it turning into Alzheimer's and dementia?
I believe there is a way. And indeed, I should say that even in Australia, a huge trial that was conducted just quite recently that gave people a lot of support with diet, exercise, and brain training. They
Uh-huh.
showed a decrease in the onset of cognitive decline, and those people did not have a diagnosis of anything at the beginning. But Dr.
Uh,
Bredesen's trial, which recruited people who did have a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment, so they did have impaired cognition on those 30-point tests I'm talking about. When he applied his protocol, people improved in cognitive function. Well, 84% of people did, an excellent score. So there are things that people can do.
And what are sort of the ages that we should start being aware of the signs, or if we see sort of our parents or grandparents, what's the age that it starts declining if we're going to notice them? Or is it varied from different and for different genders?
Well, it's highly individualized, but the average age of diagnosis of early Alzheimer's, which I'm calling mild cognitive impairment, is about 70. But it takes decades to come on. Some people come and find me in their 50s. And because there are certain blood tests and there are things we can do, I'd encourage people to start thinking about their brain from middle age. We've got a lot of risk factors we can leverage in our middle age, and particularly thinking about women. This is when women go through perimenopause and menopause, which has a huge influence on their brain health and their risk of getting dementia later in life. So I think it's earlier than people think.
Yeah, because I hear people, even because I treat a lot of the perimenopause and menopause patients, and they're like starting to like forget things. I'm getting brain fog. They're like, I don't remember things as like I used to. So they're already starting to notice as they're going through that perimenopause, menopause, like you said, in their late 40s, early 50s. There's already signs that are starting to show. They may not be there yet, but obviously they're starting to notice there's a difference from where I was a couple of years ago.
Indeed, most of the symptoms, although there's a long list of symptoms of perimenopause that are rooted in the brain. Even hot flashes, which is our sort of
Yeah.
the quintessential symptom, is the brain. Temperature receptors all getting it skewy in the brain, and that brain fog is real. It's a common complaint, common symptom that people experience. I'd like to stress that a lot of studies have looked at the cognition of women going through perimenopause and postmenopausal women, and they're unimpaired, but it's the feeling to these women that are experiencing brain fog. Lisa Mosconi was the first person to look at glucose uptake in the brains of women before and during and after menopause, and no one had looked at it before. And she demonstrated that women's brains are struggling to take up glucose, which is a sign that their metabolism is changing compared to men. So what she demonstrated was that during peri and postmenopausally, women's brains have trouble with metabolism.
Is that why I've heard the name like type 3 diabetes associated with Alzheimer's and dementia?
I'm not a great fan of type 3 because it really is type 2.
Yeah. Well, yes. Yeah.
Well, the thing is, type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, is a major risk factor for Alzheimer's disease.
Right.
And it is access to glucose that's going on. And one of the earliest signs that we can see on scanning is the brain the brain lacking access to glucose. So it's not a terrible name for it. It's got to do with glucose metabolism, but there are many other causes besides type 2 diabetes. Yeah, that is why we've heard that name linking diabetes to Alzheimer's disease.
So should they be getting early blood testing done and especially checking things like, I guess, glucose levels and HbA1c, other sort of markers and blood testing that should be done earlier to know the possible risk factors? Obviously with diet, but the main thing would be at least getting some sort of testing done. And because a lot of people don't check their HbA1c and other sort of glucose markers until they request it for certain doctors or there's a family history of perhaps diabetes.
Absolutely. And I would add to that list a fasting insulin so that we can get a HOMA IR score, an index for insulin resistance. Because it's great if someone's fasting glucose and their HbA1c, which gives a little clue about their average glucose for the last 3 months. It's great if those numbers are optimal, but we'd need to have a little peek behind and see just how hard the pancreas is working to keep those numbers looking good. If the pancreas pumps out insulin, if it's pumping out more than like 6 units per liter, then or milliunits per liter, then it's working hard, and it's a sign of sort of pre insulin resistance.
Why do you think the rates are globally increasing? Like, as a general, are we just more stressed? Are we eating more sugar in general? What is it? Why is it that these rates are increasing so much globally? Like, worse than we've seen, I think, decades ago.
That's a really good question, and I'm not going to have a definitive answer. I've just got my gut feeling, which is that, well, 20 plus years ago, women were scared away from hormones, and
Yeah.
we've got recent evidence on meta-analysis, retrospective analyses, to show that going on to hormone replacement therapy at the time of perimenopause decreases a woman's risk of dementia by 30 to 50%. So now we've
Wow.
got a bunch of women who 20 years ago were scared away from hormones. Our
Yeah.
diet has deteriorated rapidly, and our processed food consumption is just heartbreaking. So when you put all the risk factors together, because that's going to be a risk factor for type 2 diabetes, which I've said is a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease, and then that we've gotten really good at detecting cancers early and managing heart disease. These are all big wins for the population, but really I think now it's time for the brain to take the top priority.
So how early can we start? You said the brain training, I mean, even I think in our 40s, right? Is that the time to sort of start doing some brain training, maybe getting all of these tests done and looking at the prevention? Or even if you are diagnosed, is there a way to slow down that cognitive decline as well?
Well, I would urge people in their midlife to not pull back on certain things. I realize that this is a time of life when people get very, very busy. But in people's 50s, there was a study that showed that people who really did do the extra program or push ahead with their career rather than letting it all coast and slow down, that they did better cognitively later on. So I realize people get messages to keep pushing, but I just want to put a little plug in there for maintaining things that are cognitively hard, like another course. And it might not be in your career, just in something that's an interest, to keep those interests up, because they'll maintain social connections as well. So it's a matter of, I think, not presuming that we can just coast through late midlife and then into late life with our brain going the same if we don't give it the same exercises.
And is stress a big cause? Obviously, I notice when people are stressed, they're eating a lot more. They're on the run, they're eating, and that obviously will, increase sugar and glucose, but they're on the run, they're not eating well, they're managing, young kids a lot of the time in their 40s. And so, yeah, there's not a lot of time for their own self-care or to eat as well as they should.
And it's such a shame. When I work with people to improve their brain health, I really give them a long list of things to do.
Yeah.
And one of them is to fit in a daily meditative practice. Even if that daily meditative practice was very short, or if there were a few really short ones during the day that start with 10 seconds quite literally, just to break any negative thought spirals or bring the heart rate and blood pressure down a little bit. We're meant to be able to have a low level of cortisol and low level of stress generally during the day, with short, sharp periods of increased stress. So when we do have a period of increased stress, I would like people's stress level to then return to that baseline, a nice low baseline. Stress levels for sure are correlated with cortisol levels. This is the hormone of stress that our adrenals make to help us wake up in the morning and help us jump out of the way of a car or something. But if those cortisol levels are high all the time, that's definitely associated with a smaller hippocampal volume, the part of the brain that we need for short-term memory. So whilst I give people a lot of things to work on in a tempered way, measured way, it's so important to take that time to just decompress.
And that's not what a lot of people have time to fit in. They don't have time to fit in. I'm like, meditation is not sitting there cross-legged for half an hour, right? It's at least just recognizing, I think when you're going through a period of stress, like I've got two young kids, they definitely push my buttons, but it's like recognizing, okay, I'm in stress, let's just take a breather, return, like you said, return to baseline, but having that awareness so that we're not always in that high cortisol all the time. And then we're fatigued, we're eating a lot of foods to sustain that energy because it's exhausting us from from doing all of that. You mentioned that you do a lot of precision based medicine approach. What does that mean in practical terms? What is precision medicine?
It's looking for drivers of Alzheimer's disease or potential drivers of the disease, things that really people don't know that they might have on questioning. So one of them is mycotoxins. These are toxins that are made like mold toxins. I mean, mold make these biologically active compounds to protect their physical real estate, like on the wall in the bedroom or something. But they act in our body. Now, people will know if they've got mold in their home, I suppose, but people don't always know that they've got mold producing microbes in their gut or in their nose, or previous exposures in different houses. They can still have that mycotoxin in their system. So that's one. I test their urine for mycotoxins, all of the different biochemical markers in their blood, like we talked about for glucose metabolism, vitamin D, hormones, test for heavy metals. It's looking at the long list of potential drivers of disease and then treating each one of those.
Let's talk about mold real quick. How have you seen links between if people have obviously been exposed to mold and cognitive decline, Alzheimer's, dementia?
Absolutely. Yes. And
What's common?
the person that I'm thinking, well, I detect it in most of my participants, I've got to say. Some people come up with nothing lit up on their test for mold. The problem is, Ellie, that as we age, our detoxification pathways weaken.
Yes.
So many different systems weaken as we age.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about constant micro exposure to these sorts of toxins with a weaker ability to detox, then the net result is accumulation, unfortunately.
It's the same with heavy metals, although that is mold we can look at. And obviously sometimes they have to come in, strip the walls and be able to actually, work on the sort of aspects that they are exposed to. I had a client who had really, really bad mold exposure from her workplace and she had to move, right? Everyone was getting sick there. But what about heavy metals? So mold is one aspect. Heavy metals you mentioned, that's a lot harder to work on, I believe, than mold exposure is. Let's talk about heavy metals. How does that impact? Because we are so exposed to a lot of heavy metals. People have, back in the day, they don't make them with those sort of amalgams anymore with the teeth fillings, but there's a lot of that generation now who are in their 70s and 80s who had the gold fillings and that.
That's right. I do test in the blood for the 4 major heavy metals that are associated with Alzheimer's disease: mercury, cadmium, arsenic, and lead. But a blood test that's negative isn't indicative that there's none in the body, because our body's really good at tucking these toxic elements away.
Yeah.
Mercury, particularly in the brain, like it's just such, and lead in the bones, but it can also affect the brain. And they really just mess with all metabolism and mitochondrial function. So I do test hair, urine and stool, as well as blood, to look for the evidence of the heavy metals. And you're right, they're harder to get rid of, but not impossible. And it's a long slog for heavy metals, but it's just got to be worth it. You can't have mercury hanging around stuffing everything up.
No. And I think just testing and knowing that, like I said, it's not waiting till it's too late, but sort of working on a lot of that a lot earlier and starting to see what are you exposed to, asking all these diet and lifestyle questions, which a lot of, like I said, the conventional medicine doctors don't really do. They're not asking you about mold exposure or stress or heavy metals at all, from what
and it's not, like, they don't have time to study all of these different things. But I've got to say that there's a lot of, at med school, no one ever talked about heavy metals or mycotoxins, but it's proper science. I mean, chemists used to look for inspiration amongst compounds made by mold. That's where we got penicillin from. Mycophenolate is a drug given to people with an organ transplant, and I've detected that in someone's urine. Like, these are proper chemicals that some of them we dish out as drugs, and we shouldn't be dishing them out to people. So that's right. But it's just not a part of conventional medicine. And that's just the system that we're working in, I've got to say.
Yeah, it's that's got to change. But, it is a slow and steady change, hopefully, with doctors becoming a bit more sort of functional medicine based. But What is important about inflammation? Let's talk about inflammation and gut health. How is that relating to brain function and the decline? Obviously, that's something we can work on a lot earlier in terms of, preventing that completely, but working on the inflammation and the effects to brain function.
Yes, you're absolutely right. There are lots of different potential sources for inflammation, and the gut is one. It's why I do ask people on my program to avoid wheat because and gluten. It will open up the gaps between the cells and the gut lining. And when they're open, you've got bowel contents in contact with the immune system, and this is just bad news. And I realize people have different degrees of that kind of effect, but if we're just trying to optimize everything, that's what I ask people to do. Because there are direct links between the gut and the brain, and that inflammatory response is just horrible for the brain. It puts it into this mode of protection. It prioritizes protecting itself over nourishing itself and growing and reinforcing its connections. Other sources of inflammation can be from the mouth. I test people's oral microbiome. There's some really
Yeah.
nasties in there, and it's physically close to the brain, but there are some real nasties that are linked with Alzheimer's disease, heart disease, and pancreatic cancer. Like they're real nasty bugs. And then there's autoimmune diseases and grumbling infections. Yeah, inflammation is a big one.
Yeah. So, what can they do to start sort of addressing the gut? So, specific gut testing, gut health, looking at that. Like I said, yeah, oral microbiome, there's not many people that will even look at that. They think, oh, it's not important, but it's closely linked to, I guess, yeah, everything. It starts from the mouth, what we're doing, what we're eating, and then it goes down into the gut. But what sort of,
Absolutely.
yeah, what sort of things can they start looking for? So, if they've got digestive symptoms, is that something to start obviously addressing earlier on?
Yes, it is. Now, I do an organic acid test to have a look to give me clues about the gut microbiome and mitochondrial function. So my tactic is to start there, but obviously with symptoms, lots of good fiber in the diet if they can handle it. Some people's gut is too sensitive to start with that, but keeping a diet that's easily digestible, and so that's where gluten is out, especially if people are having trouble. But I encourage a diet that's protein forward with leafy green vegetables.
It's the best thing for lots of antioxidants, right? What else are you looking for in the diet, or what else do you suggest to people that is healthy? What about fats and omega-3s?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Took the words right out of my mouth. When I said meat a second ago, I was thinking fish, especially the fish that are low in
Oily.
mercury. These are the smash fish I'm sure you'd be familiar with. Salmon, mercury, anchovies, herring, and sardines.
Yes.
These are lower in mercury and high in omega-3s. And I like cruciferous vegetables because they'll aid in detoxification and give us lots of fiber. I also encourage fat intake. I like people to cook with butter, ghee, olive oil, or avocado oil, or coconut oil.
Yes,
These top.
yeah, because a lot of the other ones are very, very toxic, right? If they've got like very, very high toxins or high, like vegetable oil is the terrible oil. A lot of some of the others, which actually increases the inflammatory processes, but a lot of people are cooking with all the wrong oils for one.
In my opinion, that the vegetable oils are nasty. I believe
Don't
they
know how to
do
be
lower
vegetable.
LDL cholesterol, but it doesn't decrease heart disease. They're unstable and they're high in omega-6s. There's nothing wrong with omega-6 per se. We need them, but we just need to up our omega-3. That decreases inflammation. When we build our brain, we need lots of omega-3. Especially people that have one or two copies of the high risk gene for Alzheimer's disease, they need a lot of omega-3s.
Because omega-3 also, the brain is mainly DHA, it's mainly fat as well, right? And we need that to basically help with the brain. What about nuts? I love nuts. And, my father always taught me to have a handful of the sort of walnuts because it looks like a brain as well. Walnuts, pecan nuts, a handful of nuts as well that's got good fats and yeah, great for health as well. And avocados, eggs. What about all of that?
Absolutely. Yes, liberally.
Lots and lots of good omega-3s. So let's explain a bit more. What is a Bredesen protocol and how have you found that sort of working with your clients? What's the ideal client for the Bredesen protocol?
My ideal client would be someone who cares about their health. People who have been working on their health seem to find me, but they just want pointing in the right direction and all the appropriate testing. The protocol works really on the assumption that amyloid, which is the specifically folded protein that's synonymous with the disease, that this isn't the bad guy. It's really been produced by the brain in response to a stress or an insult that the brain's undergone. So that's where the root cause comes into it. So I look for the root causes, and there's always more than one because it's a complicated disease. This is why we've had so much trouble finding a cure, because there's not going to be a cure because everyone's got their different stresses or insults to their brain. So we look for their stresses or potential drivers of disease, work on those, and then give the brain everything it needs to heal itself. I would put them in 7 categories because there are so many, they've got to be categorized. Diet, exercise, sleep, stress, brain training, detoxification, and then supplements, where we wedge in all of the targeted nutrient replacement, but also a bit of Ayurveda like your curcumin and gotu kola, things like, lots of different things.
Mm-hmm. So it's basically, I mean, that can be started. So mainly men, because you said women in the perimenopause, when are men sort of starting to decline? Is it around the 50s as well that you've seen?
It's probably a bit later for men, I've got to say.
Oh.
And overall, the average age is around 70. It's broad, so I'm not going to break that down by gender. But men have been coming to find me in their late 60s and 70s.
Oh, much later than women. I guess because they're not going through as many hormonal changes in the 50s.
I presume so, yes.
And what would you say is the biggest misconception around Alzheimer's and dementia and reversing it? Because, right, some people think it's not reversible. What are some of the big misconceptions and misinformation out there about Alzheimer's?
I really think that it's, first of all, that memory loss or dropping cognition is normal. It's not normal. Okay. I don't think we should accept it as normal. I think we should raise our standards, honestly. It's not normal. We can work on it and bring it back and give the brain a better environment to work in. And also, it's just this element of control. I want people to feel like they have control over their cognition and to work on it earlier rather than later. Particularly if people have seen parents decline with Alzheimer's disease, they're understandably just terrified. And so I don't want them to go in a huge negative spiral about that it's destiny, because it's definitely not. But what comes with taking control is actually taking some action.
So the number one thing is, I guess, if there's already family members with that, then to be mindful and to really look at testing. We can talk about testing a little bit, but start to also work on so you are not going down the same paths because of epigenetics. We may have the same genes, but we don't have to go down the same paths. And they are scared. Like I've seen patients who've seen their parents decline. They've completely lost their memory. Like I had one he's 90 and he's just been declining the last couple of years, but he asked his wife the other day if he was his sister, and he was like getting confused between who's who now. I mean, look, they're in their 90s. It's people think if you're getting old, you're going to get Alzheimer's and dementia. I think that's another misconception. Once you get in your 80s and 90s, you're just going to forget. But there are some people that still have very sharp memories in their 80s.
That's absolutely right. And, genetics are important. The analogy is that genetics loads the gun, but the environment pulls the trigger. We have control over our environment. So that's where testing is really, it shines in prevention and early
prevention. What's the top 5 things that you should say people should start focusing on right now for basically preventing Alzheimer's dementia to those listening?
It would have to be to give their brain physically the molecules that it needs to thrive. So that's proper food, to minimize processed food, proper food that's going to build a brain, like your omega-3s, good protein and good fats. Yeah. The next would be to prioritize muscle bulk. Really, I want people to eat protein and to stress their muscles so that they grow and are strong. Our muscles, bones and brain, they all talk to each other. The next one's going to be sleep. So I'd like people to aim for 8 hours sleep. I know it's a lot. 7 to 8 hours. When we sleep, Ellie, the brain washes itself of all the chemicals from the day and gives it, a fresh start in the morning. And to work on that background stress level that we talked about, even a small daily meditative practice will make a difference. And to use their brain, because we actually are always making baby neurons, but if they're not given a job, then they die. So we need to give our baby neurons a job and work our brain.
Just going back to sleep, just on that one thing, Sarah, that you mentioned was that with sleep, 7 to 8 hours, I've tracked and I've told people, look, we've all got smartwatches, a lot of people, you can get some rings and tracking. It's not just the hours of sleep, it's the quality of sleep too, because I've seen people who've actually only getting around less than 5% of deep sleep, right? When we should be aiming for 20 to 25% of deep sleep. So it's not just the hours. And things like, just as a couple of points, like for those who may not be getting deep sleep, like first of all, looking at what you're doing as your sleep routine before that. But also one of the things I love now is mouth taping. realized a lot of people who may have issues like breathing, who breathe through their mouth. That's a big thing as well. They're taking in more toxins. They're not purifying and actually going into a deep sleep actually. And so just one of the gentlemen's, because I mentioned this because he'd never heard of mouth taping, and when he was lying on my bed and we were treating him, he was snoring and his mouth open. And then I'm like, you breathe through your mouth when you sleep, right? So we started mouth taping, and he's having the best sleep now. Like, he's waking up refreshed. So just one thing to add is, like, if you're sleeping and you're still waking up tired or not getting that, track your sleep and see if you're actually getting a solid 2 hours of deep sleep a night.
Great story. Yeah, I test people's overnight oxygen saturation, and look, people don't know that they're desaturating, that their oxygen levels are going down, and the brain needs oxygen. So a lot of people benefit from CPAP, a machine to open up their airways while they're sleeping, but they don't know if they don't test. And another thing that shifts as we age is where we store our fats. I've definitely seen people who are not overweight, but if they're in their 60s or 70s, they're just distributing the weight differently, and their airways are compromised because of it, and it's terrible for the brain. You're absolutely right. And I love mouth taping as well. Breathing through the mouth is going to do things to the oral microbiome too, really. Yeah.
I know a lot of people actually are mouth breathers, and not just that, but chronic disease like blood pressure, cholesterol, all of that, toxins, like I mentioned, because we don't have that sort of filtration system, and people don't realize how bad breathing through your mouth can be. People are like, I've got a devious septum, I can't breathe through my nose, and we've got to address that so we can breathe through our nose. So I know sleep is so critical, and most people are not prioritizing their sleep. They're getting less than 6 hours of sleep a night, sometimes 5. It's like, how do you function if you're not looking after your brain and letting it regenerate, getting rid of all the crap during the day so that we can wake up refreshed? What about alcohol, smoking, other environmental toxins? We mentioned mold, all the other stuff. I think there's so much environmental toxins just in our exposure. We could be here all day talking about that. But just as a thing, alcohol and smoking.
Well, there's no doubt that alcohol is not good for the brain. Like, it's bad news, I know. So, it's up. People have to make their own personal decisions. So if anyone's going to have alcohol, like, maybe red wine's a little bit less bad than white, but it's not the amazing antioxidant drink that it was sort of purported to be a few years ago. But and also keeping the sugar content low would probably be another recommendation if someone's going to go down that path, and to stay hydrated. I mean, there's just no level that's good for the brain. I think 1 or 2 studies said that 1 to 1.5 glasses did turn on some sort of anti-cancer genes in the liver, but the evidence is not strong enough to encourage someone who does not drink to drink, like, at all. It's not strong enough to recommend that people do have alcohol. And then smoking, of course, like, this is just
heavy metals,
toxin, cadmium, yeah, you're right. And we are exposed to so many toxins in our day-to-day life. And I have to try to make myself, like, just chill when I start thinking about them. But if we're optimizing our detoxification pathways, then we are, like, doing everything that we can. One thing you didn't, like you mentioned, rightly so, alcohol and cigarettes, but microplastics and the plastics in our lives, these are quite easily controlled, like, really, like, relatively. Like, in our own home, we can move away from plastic containers, not heat things in the microwave in plastic. I keep plastic out of my dishwasher, so I'm not putting those things all over my other dishes. These are some basic things: cookware, chain swap outs, and chopping boards. They're things you can do bit by bit. So, like, as you buy a new container, like, make it not a plastic one, and a new pan, not the forever chemicals. Like, the correlation with microplastics and dementia is really scary, but we just have to do our best.
It's huge. And I guess, it's also contributing to a lot of the hormones, infertility, like, even going, on all of that. And that's obviously most of my women who are women and going through that sort of perimenopause and menopause. I mean, all of those hormonal changes, have been affected from well before. I would say wouldn't even start in the 50s, like, start exposures so early. So being mindful of that. That is also, I find, all the things we talk about is contributing to a lot of the infertility rises, as well as now, like you said, an increase in, sort of Alzheimer's and dementia. I think it starts as early as, should be doing all of this in our 20s. So without
Probably.
all of that, even with our children, like, I'm always mindful with our kids, like, good water bottles, all of the different exposures, and we do what we can with starting as young as we can to get into. I think it's more the small daily habits. Because when a client comes to you in their 70s, who've been doing this all of their life, it's really hard to start reversing a lot of this. Like we can do some, but yeah, it's easier if we start earlier, I suppose.
Absolutely.
You mentioned the connection between a bit about the hormonal balance and Alzheimer's risk, but can we just revisit, like, are there any connections between specific hormone imbalances and Alzheimer's risks, especially in women?
In women, it's estrogen is
Yeah.
the main hormone we have to talk about. Lisa Mosconi's done so much work in this area, and she really showed that without estrogen around, the brain's mitochondria they're impaired, and neurons cannot access glucose. So in the sort of while they can't access glucose, they turn to fat as their fuel source, but they take that fat from the adjacent cells, like from the myelin sheath, these cells that are important for protecting neurons. So they chomp them up to get the lipids from them, the fat, and then whatever debris is left over is mopped up by the glial cells, like the immune cells in the brain. So now we've got a brain that's having trouble accessing energy. It's in an energy crisis, and it's got inflammatory cells activated. Like it's actually not very good for the brain at all. I liken going through perimenopause and menopause as asking the brain to restructure itself. Because a lot of women come through menopause out the other side without getting Alzheimer's disease. It's not, it's not 100%. But their brains have restructured themselves, and they've learnt how to carry out all their functioning, the high level functioning with high energy demands in a completely different environment. And it's during that restructuring phase that the brain is really vulnerable to other insults. So I think that this is why middle age for women is so important. When the brain's really in that energy crisis and inflamed already, if we throw at it then all these other different potential drivers of disease, I think that's where things get really nasty.
Especially after the menopause, when the body's not making estrogen and progesterone like you did when you were having, your menstrual cycles.
Exactly. And we're asking the brain to do all of those functions, but in a completely different environment.
So is there any ways that people can transition, like you said, with even things like getting those hormones to managing it with different natural medicine as well? But yeah, looking at those levels and seeing how we can sort of cruise through the perimenopause into menopause with a bit more awareness and looking at managing, like I said, the adaptability of going into menopause with the hormones and the big shifts there.
Well, I'm just a big fan for going on to hormones, quite honestly. And it's everyone's choice, but we were really told that these hormones are dangerous, and they're not. Honestly, these are chemicals that our ovaries made in our 20s and our youth in absurd levels, up and down, up and down. They're not dangerous in and of themselves. And so I think that, I'm a big fan. I think that if we, like the studies show us, that people that go on to these hormones around the time of perimenopause decrease their risk of dementia by 30 to 50%. If a woman chooses not to, then I believe that there are lots of, all of those lifestyle changes that I encourage people to do anyway can go a long way to help with their symptoms. I'd encourage them to look at their bone density if someone decides not to go onto hormones, and support their sleep in other ways, because progesterone is just great for sleep. It does so many things that estrogen also does, but to a lesser degree, but then it's great for calming the brain. So I think my short answer is that my recommendation when you're thinking about protecting your brain would be to go on to estrogen and progesterone. And this is not medical advice, and it's everyone's personal choice, but it's my number one way that's my recommended way.
Yeah, I agree, because obviously we're not producing them anymore if we want the body to start, adapting and to manage our hormones better. And that's big risk. It's not just even for Alzheimer's, but cancer. A lot of the women with cancer, breast cancer, is all in the 50s when obviously all the hormones start shifting. And yeah, bigger risks for women in their 50s for sure. So like I said, it should start well into our early 40s, if not even earlier than that, for sure. So I guess if people are worried about with family members having gone through that, what are some early testing and some genetic testing that, people who come see you be recommended in having?
People can get a test to see what their genetic risk is with the ApoE gene.
Yeah.
See, there are 3 variations of this in the community. Variation 3 is the one that's the most common, and we talk about risk relative to that one. There are a few people around who've got variation number 2, and they've got a decreased risk of Alzheimer's disease. But there are quite a few people that have got 1 or 2 copies of ApoE4. This is the high risk gene. And we get 1 copy from each parent. So we have to talk about what we have to, let's say 4-3 or 4-4 or 3-3. And people with 1 or 2 copies of ApoE4, I would encourage them to do this sort of prevention a bit more aggressively and to increase their omega-3 and to really work on their inflammatory pathway, because people with those, with 1 or 2 copies are a bit more trigger happy for inflammation. And there are some newer blood tests that give us clues about the amyloid protein in the brain. So the one I like is called Brain Scan. It's a blood test, but it's called Brain Scan. It looks at 3 different markers in the blood. One of them correlates highly with the presence of amyloid. This is the specifically folded protein that's associated with Alzheimer's disease. There's that one marker. It's one of the tau proteins. The other one is NFL, neurofibrillary light chain. That one just gives us a clue about any neurodegenerative disease process going on in the brain. And finally, GFAP, which gives us an idea about whether the glial cells are activated or not. So activated could be mopping up if we're healing, or it could be inflammation if we're on a disease trajectory, like heading in the wrong direction. So I like that one to give us those 3 different markers to give us an idea of how the brain's going.
I also love getting your omega-6/3 checked as well to see what the inflammation levels. Obviously, if we need to up your omega-3, then we need to know what those levels are as well. So that's a great one. Very easy to do, those ones. But definitely earlier is better than later. So you can start implementing, like you said, like all these daily changes can start making a difference now. And then just quickly, I wanted to touch on mitochondrial health. There's lots of information out there about creatine, different sort of collagens, and all the other sort of things that people are taking. But mitochondrial health and brain health, what are some of the things that we can start doing to make sure, the mitochondria is working well and, to keep them healthy?
Excellent point. The brain is such a metabolically active organ. Like it apparently takes up 25% of our energy, but only weighs 2%, what have you. So it's very sensitive to any disturbance in energy supply. So it really wants to be sensitive to insulin. This is why I want people to check their insulin level and be insulin sensitive. That's the opposite of resistant. There's a few different things. Like in the testing that I do, it gives us clues about which micronutrients could be missing and which ones could be helpful. But alpha lipoic acid is great for brain mitochondria. Creatine, like you said, I am a fan of. It's one of the most studied supplements around, and it just gives the tissues an immediate energy supply, and it's soaked up by the muscles. So if people have to take a bit more to get it enough that it's sort of the brain gets its little share after the greedy muscles have soaked it all up. Making sure that B vitamins and magnesium, zinc are optimized is also really important for that mitochondrial function.
So lots of great things. But I think people are scared to take a lot of supplements. They're not sure how. So I think working with, and also quality supplements, if you're just going to go out and buy something from the shelf. Like one thing is the omega-3s. Be careful with the omega-3s that you buy. Because apparently, over 97, 98% are just, not great supplement, not great quality for sure. So always get good quality supplements. See someone that's good quality supplements. And you usually won't find amazing quality supplements from your local supermarket.
Often not, but it's hard. It's so hard to know. I do use consumer labs. They do third-party testing, but they don't test everything. So you're left with the word of the producer, and
especially with the fish oils, just check that it has got some sort of testing and usually low heavy metals with that. But look, what really excites you about the future of Alzheimer's prevention? Like obviously there's so much changing in the landscape of medicine, technology, but what are you hoping is going to be a huge change with the future of Alzheimer's prevention?
I'm really encouraged by the recent trial that came out with the researchers. It's a collaboration between Sydney and Melbourne. They really did throw a lot of effort at this trial, and governments are paying attention to these numbers, which show that 45% of the worldwide dementia burden could be slashed if we paid attention to certain risk factors. So I'm excited that there's general public interest in preventing and reversing Alzheimer's disease, and that it's backed by government as well. So I think that this is really dementia prevention's time to shine.
That's amazing that they know that there's a decline and they've got to do something, because that's where, look, we're having an aging population as well. It's not just here. I think it's worldwide. And we're going to see things like huge Alzheimer's, dementia, and cognitive decline if we're not working on that prevention now.
Yeah, I totally agree. But we have so much to offer. To watch someone be hollowed out from the inside, their personality and their memories in their 60s or 70s, like I just don't think that's very old. The person that my best friend's father who passed away, he was contributing enormously to his grandchildren's lives and to their whole family. And unfortunately, he didn't get to meet all of his grandchildren. Like he had so much more to contribute. And I would encourage people just to really hold on to that and aim high.
Yeah, exactly. No, good point. So I guess, Sarah, with all the listeners today, what is one takeaway message from today's conversation about brain health that you'd want them to really understand and to be able to walk away from?
I think it has to be that we are not powerless. And I think if we really take control over our health, then we can do a lot more than we've been led to believe over the previous decades.
And there's always hope, I guess, when patients are facing cognitive decline, not to be scared, because like I said, just changing a lot of those sort of things with our diet, lifestyle, we can really slow that down and maybe even reverse a lot of the damage.
I agree. Well said.
Thank you so much for your amazing practical tips. It was such a practical conversation. I'm sure the listeners took away some amazing gold nuggets. I'm going to post in the notes how they can connect with you, Sarah. And yeah, it was amazing to have you on. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Ellen.
Thank you so much for joining us today's conversation. I hope this episode has left you feeling empowered and hopeful, knowing that there is so much we can do to support our brain health throughout our lives. One of the biggest takeaways from today's conversation is that cognitive decline doesn't happen overnight, and many of the factors that influence brain health, such as nutrition, sleep, movement, stress management, metabolic health, and hormone balance are things we can begin addressing today. Huge thank you to Dr. Sarah Stevens for sharing her knowledge, insights, and passion for helping people protect their cognitive health and optimize their quality of life. So if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who may benefit from this information. Together, we can help spread awareness about the importance of protecting brain health and healthy aging. Until next time, take care of yourself, nurture your health, and remember, small changes today can have a profound impact on your future well-being. Thank you for listening.